Have you ever wondered what happens when the very people meant to protect you are the ones orchestrating the cover-up of your own murder? It's a pretty chilling question, isn't it? Today, we're unpacking a true story that really pushes the limits of human cruelty and systemic betrayal. It's a case so deeply disturbing that it literally forced an entire nation to question the integrity of its own justice system.
To understand how this all went down, we really need to set the scene. Picture this. The date is August 14th, 1989. The location is Kazhinat, which is this tiny, secluded railway village deep in the freezing, isolated forests of Siberia. We're talking about a place so small it only has 24 residents. It's 1:40 in the morning, pitch black. Two experienced train driver brothers, Vadim and Igor Sipranko, are commanding a massive 74-car freight train. And then, suddenly, their headlights catch something completely impossible lying directly across the tracks ahead.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're walking through the incredibly dark and twisting facts of the Kazhinat Railway mystery. By sticking strictly to the evidence, the timelines, and the original case files, we're going to break down exactly how an undeniable atrocity was swept right under the rug, and how a group of relentless parents fought a massively corrupt system to finally bring the truth to light.
Section 1. That horrifying night scene.
Okay, let's dive into this. Imagine the sheer terror those two train drivers must have felt. They blared the emergency horn. They slammed on the brakes. But you know, a fully loaded 70-car freight train simply cannot stop on a dime. After the agonizing sound of steel crushing whatever was on those tracks, the brothers grabbed their lanterns and climbed down into the Siberian night. What they found wasn't wildlife. It was the scattered bodies of several young men. And what really confused the drivers right off the bat was that as the deafening train approached, not a single one of these figures had moved, flinched, or even tried to run. These were the victims: Dmitry, Nikolai, Vadim, Oleg, Vyacheslav, Roman, and Victor. 7 teenage boys, all just 15 years old, from a tight-knit community nearby. They weren't troublemakers at all. They were literally just an ordinary group of friends who played football together and had gone on a simple weekend camping trip to gather cedar cones. Their lives were just beginning before they intersected with absolute evil that night.
Section 2. The police's fake theory.
So naturally, the local police were called to this gruesome scene. But instead of launching a massive homicide investigation like you'd expect, the authorities did something totally baffling. They quickly spun a narrative just to close the case. The police officially claimed that the boys, exhausted from their weekend in the woods, missed their 10:40 p.m. train, wandered back, got tired, laid down on the hard steel railway tracks to sleep, and simply didn't wake up when a massive freight train ran them over. Boom, case closed. But this brilliantly illustrates just how absurd that official story really was. Toxicology reports proved there was zero alcohol or drugs in the boys' systems, so they definitely weren't passed out. Plus, their backpacks weren't even on them. They were found neatly lined up 250 meters away from the bodies, and again, those veteran train drivers confirmed the boys did not move an inch when a blaring train approached, because they were already dead before the train ever hit them. Section 3. The case reinvestigation.
The parents of these 7 boys knew instantly that the police were lying to them, but they were ordinary people up against a massive, corrupt local bureaucracy. For 2 agonizing years, they were just completely ignored. Their calls were dropped, and crucial initial evidence was purposely, quote-unquote, lost by the local police. Out of sheer desperation in 1991, right as the Soviet Union was actively collapsing, they wrote a letter directly to Russian President Boris Yeltsin, and miraculously, it landed in the right hands. The Prosecutor General's office bypassed the local authorities entirely and sent 2 elite investigators from Moscow to reopen the case. Now, because the local cops had allowed the physical crime scene to just wash away in the rain, the Moscow investigators had to take extreme measures. They actually exhumed the boys' bodies under the cover of night. And the new autopsies absolutely destroyed the police cover-up. The boys had skull fractures, broken jaws, and deep stomach wounds that were distinctly caused by blunt force trauma way before the train ever hit them. When experts tested these injury patterns, they found a horrifying match. The weapons used were heavy, industrial tools found only in local railway depots.
So this definitely wasn't an accident, it was a massacre. But who actually did it? The major breakthrough came when some villagers mentioned a local man named Vasily, who happened to be in jail at the time for murdering his own brother. The lead investigator cornered Vasily in his cell. It took a massive psychological game of chess, but eventually the dam broke. Actually, it took exactly 3 separate confessions from different locals to finally unravel this sprawling, terrifying conspiracy that involved multiple grown men. Section 4. Truth of the horrific murders.
The final and honestly most damning confession came from a local railway lineman who finally cracked under the pressure of his own guilt. Through his testimony, investigators were finally able to piece together the absolute nightmare of what really happened on August 14th. Here is how things rapidly escalated into unimaginable violence. A group of local men, heavily intoxicated and looking for more alcohol or drugs, went down to the station. There, they ran into the 7 boys waiting for their train. An argument broke out, allegedly over the boys tampering with a signal wire, though no proof of that was ever found. Suddenly, a senior police lieutenant named Nikolai, who was drinking with these men, pulled out his service weapon and brutally smashed one of the boys in the head with the butt of his gun. Realizing he had just committed a major assault as a police officer in front of a bunch of witnesses, Nikolai gave a chilling order to his drunk friends: kill them all to hide the evidence.
Trapped on the platform by a police officer wielding a loaded gun, these teenage boys couldn't run. The drunk group of men grabbed whatever heavy railway tools they could find lying around the station. In an absolute frenzy of violence, they butchered the 7 teenagers. Once the boys were dead, Lieutenant Nikolai used his law enforcement knowledge to orchestrate the cover-up. He ordered the men to drag the bodies onto the tracks and plant their backpacks far away to stage the whole scene as a tragic, sleepy train accident.
Section 5. Mockery of the justice system.
When this revelation came out, it sent shockwaves through Russia. By 1995, the killers, including Police Lieutenant Nikolai, the lineman, Vasily, and his brothers, were all dragged into a packed courtroom. After a grueling 7-month trial, they were rightfully handed the death penalty. But if you think this is where the families finally found some peace, you are gravely mistaken. Prepare yourself for a complete mockery of the justice system. Now, what's really interesting about this timeline is what happens in 1996. At this specific time, Russia was desperately trying to join the Council of Europe. To do that, they had to sign human rights agreements requiring them to abolish the death penalty. Taking advantage of this massive political shift, the Supreme Court completely overturned the death sentences of the Kazhinat killers. And due to a shocking, chaotic legal loophole involving procedural delays, these convicted mass murderers weren't just spared execution, they were literally released straight back onto the streets as free men.
But, you simply cannot release monsters without consequences. The post-release chaos was immediate. Vasily attacked his own cousin to silence him. Vasily's brother was mysteriously found suffocated. In a really grim twist of fate, the lineman who helped stage the bodies was found dismembered on the exact same railway tracks. And perhaps most sickening of all, the mastermind behind the massacre, Police Lieutenant Nikolai, actually used his freedom to successfully run for office. He became a local municipal politician. Just unbelievable.
Section 6. The Last Hope for Justice. As the years dragged on, the rest of the country kind of began to forget about the Kazhinat murders, but the families certainly did not. They were absolutely relentless. In 1999, 10 full years after their sons were slaughtered, they somehow managed to force the Prosecutor General's office to reopen the case for a second time. This led to a grueling 4-year investigation where 5 different forensic experts painstakingly reviewed every single broken bone and hidden file all over again. Finally, in 2003, 14 years after the murders, a new verdict was reached. The men were found guilty once again. But when you look at the final sentencing numbers, they are shockingly light. Nikolai, the police officer who ordered the entire massacre, received just 10 years, the linemen got 10 years, and Vasily got only 7 years. It was a heavily flawed, bittersweet victory, highlighting the incredibly jagged pill of justice in a totally broken system.
I think the ultimate takeaway from this explainer is the unbreakable spirit of these parents. They stood like a rock and did not give up. For 14 years, they faced down corrupt police, a flawed Supreme Court, and ridiculous political loopholes. They completely refused to let their sons be remembered as careless boys who just fell asleep on the tracks. They fought, and they forced the truth into the light.
The Kazhinat Railway is forever scarred by the events of 1989, and it leaves us all with a very uncomfortable realization. If those in power can manipulate the truth so easily to cover up something this horrific, how many other quote-unquote accidents out there are still waiting for someone brave enough to question them? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and never stop looking for the truth.